Welcome to the Alaris Global podcast. At Alaris Global, we help international tech companies build and pay their American sales teams. On this podcast, we speak with people with global careers about their journeys and insights.
I'm pleased to have Manoj Kumar on the podcast. Manoj is the founder and CEO of Social Alpha, which is a nonprofit startup accelerator for science and technology startups based in India. Tell me about the work that you do at Social Alpha.
Hi, thanks for having me on your podcast. Social Alpha is a not-for-profit science and technology focused innovation, curation, and venture development platform. We search for innovators and help them build their companies, or if they already have their companies, we help them accelerate their journey to market and communities and help them with not only funding, but also lab access and mentoring, and also help them access market and follow on capital. So it's an integrated model where we have put together incubation, acceleration, investment, and market access together. We primarily work in areas like climate change, healthcare, and livelihoods, but we focus on deep science-based technology products and primarily work on impact areas where market failure is visible.
Why did you decide to start Social Alpha?
See, there is a growing momentum in India around startups. So, we have had more than 100 unicorns over the last couple of years. Startup ecosystem is booming, thriving, and a large number of people are taking entrepreneurial risk to create value and wealth. But there are some areas where we don't see enough entrepreneurial activities. For example, if you're working on clean energy transition or primary health or livelihoods, you see gap in terms of ecosystem support and capital. And that is what drove me to start Social Alpha, because we wanted to support entrepreneurs and innovators who are working in these tough areas and create an ecosystem for them, and also create a mechanism by which they could raise capital. So that's why we kept it not for profit, because we raise not for profit capital from philanthropy, government, and corporations, and aggregate that to provide a blended capital model to our startups.
That's great. What kind of support do you provide to the startups that you work with? What do they need the most help with?
So it's a portfolio of things. For example, we have our own labs where startups can come build their product, test them. We have our own sandboxes for testing, pilots, and validation. We help them get access to our nonprofit partners on the ground so that they can do real life testing. We help them with capital, which could be grant or equity or both. And we also help them with various government schemes. So the idea is to get them access to anything and everything they may need in order to get to market. So we have created this larger ecosystem. Yeah.
That's great. What are some of your favorite startups that you've worked with at Social Alpha, and what do they do?
Actually, all my startups are favorite. I like them, I love them, and would like to work as closely as possible with all of them. So it's very difficult to identify, but I'll give you some examples from portfolio without any preference for all of them. So in healthcare, we have a startup that has built a 1.5 Tesla MRI machine that reduces the cost of MRI scan significantly and makes it more accessible and affordable. It's called Voxel Grade, and they have just reached the Series A round last year. We have a company called Fool that collects flowers from temples and recycles them into various lifestyle products. And it's a biomaterial company. So they have a number of new biomaterials in the pipeline. They've also reached Series A. We have a company called Hasirudala that organizes waste pickers into franchisees and then help them create predictable livelihoods, as well as solves the problem of waste management in cities like Bangalore. Stops a lot of waste going into the landfills. At the same time, segregated waste goes into various value chains, including recycling, energy, etc. So these are some of the early startup company that we started supporting in 2016-17 as we started our operations. Recently, we have supported a company called Cremansi, that is India's first animal nutrition company that has used biotechnology protocols to create high quality animal feeds from vegetable or agri waste. Uh, I can keep talking about them. We have Bionic Yantra, a medical robotics company that creates rehabilitation solution for people with spinal cord injuries, which has just finished this clinical trials in one of the large hospitals. So yeah, many.
Great. What do you look for in the startups that you work with?
Being a not-for-profit, we are an impact-first organization. So we are not a typical venture capital firm or an incubator. Our philosophy is that in order to solve some of the most difficult, complex, and tough problems of society or planet, we need to support science and technology innovations. So we see that whether the innovation is disruptive, whether entrepreneur has execution capability, and whether it creates large-scale non-linear impact. And we believe that if you create that kind of an impact at population scale, you would definitely also create new markets and eventually make money out of it. So while we are impact first, we believe that if we create impact, then the market will follow.
Great. India now has more than 100 unicorns. Why has India's startup team been able to grow so fast?
See, India is a country that has been, getting advantage of its large demographics, great educational system, and a lot of policy imperatives from the government as well. Global capital market players have been coming to India in search for not only the market, but also market players, innovators, and startups. So it's a confluence of, capital access, uh, excellent human resources, new technology innovations, and positive policy environment that is driving the current growth of startups in India.
What excites you about India's startup scene?
I think what excites me more is that India's startup scene is not just about technology and internet-based companies that drove the first round of growth in India, which was more or less modeled around Silicon Valley type of startups. But what excites me that the small town India is actually innovating in areas like waste management, climate change, circular economy, agriculture, livestock, water, sanitation. Some of these complex problems that if you solve in India at population scale can be replicated around the world. So India can become a really good sandbox for building, testing these new innovations, and the market size in India is large enough to create solutions which are replicable elsewhere.
Great. What do you think needs to happen in India for its startup scene to grow more?
I think what we need to do is to make more capital available, especially in the areas like hardware and embedded software, deep science, and tech areas. We have plenty of capital available for consumer internet space, but I think this has to democratize and reach out to several other areas of economy.
Great. Tell me more about what needs to be done to increase more support for deep tech startups and these startups solving our intractable problems.
If you look at deep tech and deep science, startups, a lot of money that goes in early stage research and development comes from government and philanthropy, while there's a gap between what government and philanthropy funds versus what market is willing to take over. So between early stage startups and the market acceptance, there's a large gap, and this gap needs to be filled. So we need, capital and support system between government and market. And I think that is where Social Alpha plays. And that's an interesting space. And we expect more people to come in there, because at that point of time, startups have consumed all the philanthropic and grant capital, but they're still struggling to get access to risk capital from private capital pools. So if you can fill that gaps with LP capital through VCs or corporations, I think that would create a really good catalytic momentum for India's startup ecosystem.
Great. Which startups do you support that are addressing climate change?
Within climate change, we have startups which are working on clean energy transition, battery research. We have startups which are working on energy efficiency and efficiency in decarbonizing grid. We also have startups working on industrial decarbonization, circular economy, waste management, sustainable consumption and production. We also have startups which are working in areas like sustainable construction. Every startup in climate portfolio is trying to demonstrate that they can reduce greenhouse gas emissions, and we actually measure it for every startup in our portfolio. We measure the greenhouse gas emission reduction potential over the next few years, and that becomes one of the important levers for us to determine whether we can invest in that startup or not.
Which startups do you support that are increasing economic growth?
All of them, because by definition all the startups are solving socioeconomic problems, but they're also creating new markets. As they create new markets, they create economic activities. So the difference could be difference of degree, where one startup creates more economic growth than the other, but eventually all these startups, if they are successful, they definitely create value and economic growth. Yeah.
Great. There's now a market downturn facing the tech industry. What's your advice to Indian startups looking to weather the storm?
I think the downturn is there, but it is limited to startups which are working in mainstream tech startup world, where a large number of startups are consuming standard mainstream VC playbook or impact investing playbook. My recommendation would be to conserve cash and be little careful in managing your runway, and try to extend it as much as you can till the situation turns around. But I do not see really a problem for startups in deep science, tech, and social impact space, because the capital available was already low. It can't become lower than that. So the only way to go there is look up rather than worry about downturn, because there was never enough capital in that space. Yeah.
What do you think can be done to increase the amount of capital in deep tech and social impact?
I think we need to make sure that we can aggregate capital from multiple sources. There are not many LPs who are interested in deep tech space, so we need to blend philanthropic capital, government money, as well as LP capital in the pools, where we can create some kind of a blended capital model for supporting these startups.
Great. How long do you think the market downturn is going to last?
I think it's going to be okay in 18 to 24 months. The downturn is more because of extra careful attitude of most of the investors because of rising interest rates and current recessionary trends. But I think it's going to be okay, because people who have surplus capital to be deployed, they're always looking for avenues for capital deployment, and the search for either impact or return or both will bring in capital back. So this current level of cautious approach will remain for some time, but it should be okay in a few months, in a short period of time. Yeah.
My company, Alaris Global, helps startups in India and other countries expand into the US. Tell me about your advice to Indian startups looking to expand globally into the US.
I think Indian startups who have been doing business in India but have promising, compelling solutions for global markets can benefit from your expertise and your company's services as they go global. It's important for startups to understand that if they have solved for a market and the solution has been accepted by consumers or communities in that market, there are similar markets available at the global scale, and they need global expertise to, expand into new geographies. So I think companies like yours really provide a valuable service to startups at a significantly lower cost, because they don't have to create infrastructure or offices or on the ground presence in these countries initially. They can always benefit from your services and support.
Great, thank you. What kinds of challenges do Indian startups face when they look to expand globally?
I think most of the Indian startups, if they are, in their early stage, they have limited capital and they're still trying to address the Indian market needs, which itself is a very large market. So the challenge is, to to decide whether they continue to expand in India or start looking at global market, and when to do that, or do it in parallel, or try to capture large market share in India and then look at the global market. But in that case, they may lose out on the opportunity because there could be other startups who are addressing global market. So I think it all boils down to how much capital you can raise and how much capital you are willing to invest in expansion. And if you have access to capital for expansion, then it makes sense to expand your operations and try to address a larger market need.
Tell me about your journey to leading Social Alpha. I see that you had a variety of business leadership roles before Social Alpha.
Yeah, so I worked in capital markets. I've been an entrepreneur. I worked in global corporations, ran investment businesses, but I have always been thinking of using my understanding of business management, entrepreneurship, innovation, and capital market investing to use in the social and developmental sector. So that led me to think about a model where we could bring philanthropic intent and capital market operating models together. And that led to the birth of Social Alpha. So we created this not-for-profit platform that focuses on innovation curation, and our venture development approach is more like a toolkit where we use when VC playbook, philanthropic playbook, and government playbook together in a model where we try to make sure that we look at each startup in its with its unique business model in a way where we can use different elements of support. So it could be giving them access to labs, or giving them access to expertise, or giving them access to capital, or a combination thereof. So it's a unique model, and since inception we have curated more than 1,000 innovations, incubated 200, invested in 60, and 3 of our startups have actually reached at a stage where they are at Series A level. So we are an early stage innovation curation and venture development platform. The uniqueness of Social Alpha model is that it's neither an investor, nor an incubator, nor an accelerator, but an integrated stack that does bits and pieces of everything in order to create market. So we may start very early stage, or accelerate a startup, or just provide them market access depending upon where they are in their journey.
Great. What kind of support do social impact startups need to succeed?
I think the biggest support impact startups need is patient capital, which cannot come from the mainstream playbook. So they need capital that is willing to underwrite risk they are taking, as well as willing to wait for a much longer time horizon before there is an exit opportunity. But the second very important help they need is market access, because they're creating products and solutions which have potential to create new markets. And that becomes even more important, as there could be a situation where philanthropy or government are actually the procurement providers to these startups. So you will have to do a lot of policy advocacy around procurement policies, or you may have to provide certain market access support to these startups.
Is there anything you'd like to add?
No, thank you very much. Thanks for inviting me to your podcast, and wish you all the best as you explore Indian startup ecosystem to provide global market access to them. Looking forward to working with you on this.
Thank you so much.
Pleasure.